Lesson 2, Properties of Operations. So if you remember in Lesson 1, we talked about the 4 operations: adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. If we want to undo an operation, that's called inverse operations. That just means undo. So the inverse operations, we have adding and subtracting. So if we add 2 numbers together, if we want to get back to the first number, we subtract the answer in the second number. Inverse operations for multiply is divide. Inverse of divide is multiply. There are several properties of our 4 operations here. We're going to draw a little table. So we'll put properties of operations. And the first property that we're going to go over, we're going to put 2 columns here. We have the commutative. You may have heard the word commute, which just means you're going from one place to the other. A lot of times parents need to commute to work, which means they drive to their work. They leave their house, they drive to the work, and then they drive back. That's a commute. So commutative just means switching places. So if we had 2 numbers added together, if we switch their places, they're still going to be equal. Doesn't matter what order we add them in. Or if we multiply them, it doesn't matter what order we multiply them, they're still going to give you the same answer, so they will be equal. Some examples would be 2 plus 4. If I added 2 plus 4, I'm going to get the same thing if I add 4 plus 2. Or if I multiply 2 times 4, it's the same answer as if I do 4 times 2. So that demonstrates the commutative property. The order doesn't matter when you're adding or multiplying. We have another property called the associative property. There's one of addition and one of multiplication. So if you have 3 or more numbers added together, and you add the first 2 together and then the third, it's the same thing as if you had those 3 numbers added together, but you add the last 2 numbers first and then the first one. So you'll get the same answer. Notice that the A, B, and C are in the same order on both sides. A comes first, B's in the middle, C's on the end. We just changed the parentheses. Same with multiplying. If you multiply the first 2 and then the third, it's the same answer as if you multiply the second 2 and the first, or the last 2 and the first. So here's an example. If I add 2 plus 3 together and then I add 4, it's going to be the same thing as if I add 3 plus 4 together first and then add 2. You'll get the same answer. If you're multiplying, if you multiply 2 times 3 and then multiply by 4, it's the same thing as if you multiply 3 times 4 first and then times it by 2. So the order doesn't matter when you're adding and subtracting if you have 3 or more. The identity property, I like to think of superheroes. You want to keep your identity. So if A is a superhero, what do I have to add to A so that it equals A, so that it stays the same, keeps its identity? So when you're adding, if you want to stay the same, you're going to add 0. So that's the identity property for addition. There's an identity property for multiplication. So if we start with A, what do we have to multiply by to keep A the same? It's not 0 because 0 will change it to 0. So we want to multiply by 1. A times 1 equals A. And here's some examples. If I had 5, I need to add 0 to keep my identity, or keep the 5 the same. Or if I have 5 and I want to multiply, I have to multiply by 1 to keep the identity the same. So that's the identity property. Then we have property of 0 for multiplication. Property of 0 for multiplication. This is one of the very first things that you learned when you learned your times tables. Whenever you multiply any number, we'll call it A, times 0, you're going to get 0. That's just the property that 0 has. Property of 0 for multiplication. So if I took 6 times 0, I'm going to get 0. So there's my examples. Now if you look back up here at the identity property, notice that for addition we add 0. So 0, the number 0, is called the additive identity. And 1 is called the multiplicative. Multiplicative is a super cool word. I want everyone to say multiplicative. Multiplicative. And again, so much fun to say, multiplicative. Okay, that's the end of lesson 2.